Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Producer Paul. Good to be with you again. Today, we continue with part 2 of our conversation with Caitlin Cogan Doemner. Last week, Caitlin and I became so engrossed in discussing her upcoming book, The Ecstatic Way, that we had to close the show without chatting about the subject I really wanted to talk about, which was the dance of masculine and feminine energies. In today's show, we discuss important lessons about one aspect of our deepest existential nature. That is, inside each of us exists a sort of binary truth that we all possess masculine and feminine energies. It is not unlike the Chinese philosophy of the yin and the yang, which is closely related to masculine and feminine energies. I found this definition, which might be helpful, although it's a little philosophical, but I think it's helpful. It says this: yin and yang is a concept originated in ancient Chinese philosophy that describes how obviously opposite or contrary forces may actually be complementary, interconnected in the natural world, that the opposites come together. Today, our conversation with Caitlin, we talk about the idea of these energies that drive our actions, our beliefs, and our ways by which we understand our own personal world. With that, let's begin. Caitlin Doemner, welcome back to the next chapter with Charlie.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so excited for this topic. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. You know, Caitlin, we have a lot of favorite topics together.
It is. We just get to nerd out on all of the best stuff.
Yeah, except you're much more proactive into making money than I am. And it's not that I don't take your money. I would love to be richer, but do you remember the question you asked on Facebook that says, if you had all the money you would, if you had all the money you wanted, how would your life change? Do you remember that question on Facebook that you asked? And my response was, except I might buy an Aston Martin. And
we'll have to get you one of those, Charlie.
Well, yeah, they're not that expensive. I mean, they're not like Bentleys, but they are pricey. So, Caitlin, you know what I thought? I thought we might get right into our subject. Who knows what rabbit trails you and I may jump into? So, I think it might be helpful by discussing. Let's start right at the beginning, and let's start about this concept of energies. And it's a very popular word today, and it once was a subject of sort of new agey talk, but it's becoming much more prominent in our normal vocab. Tell me, when you think of energies, just, not necessarily masculine and feminine, but that we are in fact, we are just bodies of energy, and energies flow. Can you talk to me about energy so our audience can understand? We can all be talking on the same page.
Yeah, and I love this topic because it goes all the way back, as you mentioned, ancient China, following Qi and the meridians and acupuncture. And then you look over at the Indians and the Vedic tradition of chakras and prana. And so we've always had this idea that there is life force is usually a term that comes up when we talk about the energies. But it's been fascinating as we've started pulling apart the atom and moving beyond electrons. And when we keep digging deeper and deeper, we realize that E equals MC squared is spot on. There is no, it's all just energy, right? Some of the energy is just moving slower than other energies. But when you break everything down to its smallest bit, it's the only word we can use to express this frequency, this vibration, this force that then takes on the appearance of matter. We work in a Newtonian kind of Middle Earth where it looks like we're touching things. It looks like we can't move through walls. But really, if you get down to a very most basic nature and quantum mechanics, we're mostly just a lot of open space vibrating very quickly. So it's fun to think about energies all the way from the beginning of time, we were talking about it, to now the work that we're actually doing with it, and we're understanding this isn't just kind of a poetic term. This is a literal thing that is the force that makes worlds.
You know, there's a couple things that come to mind. One is, I like that you brought up the Newtonian paradigm, because that is pre-enlightenment, and that is all about dualistic thinking, right and wrong, logic, provable, and that and while Newtonian paradigms have taken us a long way in civilization in our culture, they're limiting in our psyche, because we are not dualistic. We are much more incorporated and much more together, and so there's new thought on it. And also, my son is studying energies right now, and is studying through, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the philosophy of the Hermetics, and it's in a book called Kabbalion, which is written 900. It began in the book wasn't written in 900 BC, but that's when the thoughts of energy, I mean, these people 3,000 years ago were, these philosophers were thinking of life as energy far before we knew atoms and electrons and all that there are energies involved. So this is not just, this is not just a 2000, year 2023 concept. This is thousands of years old. And it is so important to think about. I just think about how many things I do that are energy driven, that are thought driven, that are coming from somewhere other than physical being.
Yeah, when you start thinking about the fact that we say that our thoughts get manifested, that word manifestation, it's thrown around a lot in the spiritual culture, but it's just realizing that these brain waves, these things, these thoughts are heart waves. There's just so much science now coming to support the idea we are co-creating this reality together with ourselves and within community with each other. So it's a really fun concept to talk through.
And with the cosmos, it's not just here on Earth. It's connecting with all of creation. That all of creation is energy, and that we are part of that, and we are, albeit in our beliefs, a special creation. We are not apart from the generative facts of creation, and that if creation is energy, we are energy. We may be somewhat special in our creation and in our divine essence, but it still is not sans energy. So what you and I want to talk about today is, I want to delve deeply into why it is important to understand masculine and feminine energies. And we may not get into it right this minute, but it's important to understand that these energies have little to do with gender. It's not about being male nor female. It's that there may be masculine, more male-oriented energies, but it does not mean that the female does not have access and uses them. I was just reading a book on archetypes yesterday, and it talked about the Amazons, and the Amazon women were truly, had strong masculine energies, and myself personally have had very strong feminine energies. So do you want to get into the gender piece of it right now, or should we do that after we describe this a bit?
I think it might be helpful, like you said, to just reinforce that we're not speaking about male and female. We're talking about masculine and feminine. And to your point, it doesn't matter what body you have. The goal is to dance with both of the energies and figure out the rhythm that works for you. So the way I like to talk about it is that I be feminine. That's my identity energy signature. Then I do masculine. So I step into my masculine energy to do things like set goals, strategically plan, get stuff done, and push forward when things get hard. Like, there's some beautiful ways to pull in that masculine energy, but it's not where I want to live. It's not how I want to be as my normal everyday existence. So then I get to come back and step out of that role, and I get to be feminine. Similarly, my male counterparts, they've said, well, I be masculine, like, just show up. I am the container. I am always the protector, the provider. But then I do feminine. I facilitate connections and conversations and collaboration, and I nurture and creative flow and things like that. And so I think that's kind of, as we're getting towards that dance conversation, it's how do we figure out within our own selves, how do we maintain balance? And a lot of people inherit their idea of masculine and feminine from their parents, and their parents may not have done a very great job of reflecting the divine masculine and the divine feminine. So I also talk about shadow masculine and shadow feminine and versus the sacred. So shadow versus sacred, because there's just the twisted versions. You hear a lot about toxic masculinity. The post I got you and I chatting on this topic recently, I was like, well, what about toxic femininity, where these energies are completely out of balance and aren't being supported, and therefore not actually being as potent as they should be. So when we talk about kind of polarity of the masculine and the feminine, the Tao is very black, very white. This is not about creating a muddled gray Tao. And it's that contrast, polarity, that friction creates the generative force, right? So when a male and a female come together, I view it as a symbol, kind of a metaphor for the energies that are sparking around us, creating life all the time, everything around us in nature. And so in yourself, it's almost impossible for you to be your truly potent, creative, generative self if you don't have that balance of energy in your own soul.
What is the likelihood of having an unbalanced or a very acutely balanced masculine and feminine, for either, a masculine having extremely strong feminine energies, or a feminine or a woman having extremely strong masculine energies is because we see that in we see that in leadership, we see that in writing, we see that in ministries and helping particularities, or where we're trying to make someone in a better place. That balance isn't what's that?
I was going to say, I saw that in my own household growing up. My mother was the masculine, and my father was the feminine component within our family dynamic.
That's funny, because my mother I was adopted, and I was adopted, I think, I've said several times, I was adopted by a goddess at 7.5 years old. And she truly was a blend of masculine and feminine energies. She wore the pants in the family, although she made my adopted father feel like he was. She knew how to play the game. But when she spoke and she put her foot down, her foot was down, and that was it. Yet she was enormously feminine, beautiful, dressed feminine, acted feminine, accepted, loving people. As a matter of fact, I'm moving ahead just a bit too quickly, but I adopted much of my mother's energy, state of being. And
sounds like she mastered the dance.
She mastered the dance long before we even knew there was a dance. She was a magnificent person. So maybe it will be helpful if I took right from your writings a definition, the feminine and the masculine, and it's just these are just, a half dozen words describing it. This is not limited to these beliefs. It's just going to guide you. And you write this, the feminine or the yin, and we have not talked about yin and yang. And we have to talk about yin and yang. I mean, it's not possible to do this without it. But you said the feminine or the yin energy is darkness, spiritual, mystery, receiving, appreciation, and a word I love, flow. Whereas the masculine or the yang energy is light, not in weight. It's not light in weight, but it's light in brightness. It's the tangible, the manifested, active, providing, changing force. And you use a metaphor that I just loved. I think it described it to me really well. Can you describe your metaphor of the river and the riverbanks?
Yeah, the way I view the masculine energy is the masculine energy provides the form and the structure. So the riverbanks.
The container, sort of the container.
The container. Mm-hmm. I love that word, container. And the feminine energy is what flows in that container. It is the river itself. And what we've discovered is that when there are strong banks to a river, the river flows strong and forcefully and powerfully. And when there are no banks, river becomes a swamp and there is no movement. It stagnates. And so, but without river, what are the point of the banks? Then you just have a canyon. So, having that structure is really critical for flow to be possible. And as I was just pondering just now about your metaphor, there is no gray area between a river and a riverbank. I mean, there may be, a little bit of soft flow right next to the bank, but the river and the riverbank are distinct, and you're very clear on that this is not the masculine and feminine energies. We don't have combinations. We don't have gray areas. We don't have I'm going to be careful how I use the word integration, but the two aren't mixed, aren't flowing together. They maintain their own identity, their own distinctives, do they not? That they don't, that the riverbank can't become part of the river or else it's a swamp. And the river can't become a bank because there's no river. Can you talk to me about the distinction? That there is a masculine and integrated. I like in the introduction that flow that I read that the yin and the yang, which we will talk about, folks. The yin and the yang describes obviously opposite forces, but they can be complementary, interconnected, and interdependent. And notice the word missing is integrated. They're not integrated. Yeah. They're complementary, they're interconnected, and they're independent. I think that's vital. Otherwise, we become sloppy Americans. Androgynous.
and what?
And I think just impotent. I think what we're talking about here, because you asked me, how do you feel about the world's power? Is power masculine or feminine? And I was like, both. The power shows up differently. It's force versus flow, but they're both powerful energies. But when you try to blend them and be a weak intermediate version that's neither masculine nor feminine, nobody's really providing the structure. Nobody's really finding their flow. Nobody's really being assertive and being penetrating and doing insights. And nobody's actively receiving. And everybody's just trying to give 50% of whatever it is. And this muddled yuck that you're describing. Yeah, I realized my business partner, Lucas, describes it as the 200% world. You're not being 50% and coming up to 100%.
Oh,
we are
beautiful.
100% maxing out both.
Is that your man Lucas that's doing that?
World.
Yeah, I've got to meet Lucas. I mean, a telephone conversation with Lucas. He sounds so fascinating.
Yeah.
So I am thinking, when Pam and I, when I was in seminary, 30, I think our anniversary is coming up. I think it's 38. I remember the date, Caitlin, but I'm never sure about the duration. It's either 37 or 38, but I think 38. And we only had one premarital counseling session when I was in seminary. And they had a psychology department, and we met with a psychologist. And he was talking... I still remember this, 38 years later. And he was talking about the feminine. We weren't talking about energies of masculine and feminine necessarily, although we really were. And he said, the feminine is the receiver. And he was talking about just, practical day-to-day activities, about the house, the home belongs to the wife. Because just as, and this was his rationale, that and I'm a designer, I'm all part of it, but I defer to my wife's. If she feels strongly, we'll have interaction, but if she feels strongly, I default to what my wife wants. Because he said, just as in sexual intercourse, the male enters the female is the home, the female is the receiver. This is the archetype, and that way the home, when people enter the home, they're entering her domain. They're not entering his domain. And I don't know if that's true internationally, but in the United States, it's very true, isn't it? We think, if we love a house, do we go to the male and say, boy, this is a great house you've set up? I love your decor and all. No, we go to the feminine, but it is a receiving energy. Do you resonate with that at all?
I do. I always find it difficult when we start bringing it back into gender stereotypes, because I grew up in a very conservative Christian worldview, and it was talking about how the wife has to submit to the husband, and I think that just got so twisted and manipulated. But I do love that idea. That's where this whole concept of the active masculine energy penetrating, initiating, active, and the female to be the receiver, and that becomes metaphor, this really beautiful, the concepts that we're talking about. But what I find is interesting, as in general, is that historically I found it's very difficult for women to receive. We were trained socially to be givers. Right? So if you ask most people, what does it mean to be feminine? Most people are like, somebody who's warm and nurturing and friendly and takes care of other people. And that there's that kind of social expectation that be feminine means be a giver. But actually, when we're talking about these cosmic forces, the masculine, the giver, it's the feminine gets to receive pleasure, that gets to be taken care of. In this context, it's not submission, it's surrender. And that changed everything for me. It's not that I have to submit to somebody being dominant. It's I get surrender. It's this sensation. You get a choice. Relaxation. Yeah, but it's almost like this yummy relaxation. We don't, as women, I would say, generally speaking, very difficult for us to truly relax unless we are in a deeply trusting relationship with somebody that we know who is strong enough to hold us. That can be energetically or physically, but that container of being held is what allows something deep in our solar plexus, our nervous system level, deep sigh of relaxation. And the thing that drives me crazy is so few women embrace strong masculine. Well, let's be honest, there aren't a lot of really great, strong, divine masculine men out there in the world. So it is very hard to find them. But even if you find them, so many women are triggered by males, they can't find that place of surrender, which is ease and joy and pleasure.
Oh, with our whole emphasis on patriarchy and male domination, and it's just, I read of kids in schools and males. It's scary. I don't want to get into this, but it's scary that males are being encouraged not to be males. That there is something wrong with it and something dangerous to it. But we've created an entire infrastructure that supports the feminine. So the idea of just sitting still, one place, staring forward for 8 hours, just completely unnatural for males. And like being punished for not fitting into, pretty natural, like congregating and sitting still and communing. That's pretty easy for us females. The school is actually great for us, but my boys want to be out there running through the woods and climbing trees and swimming rivers, and that masculine force really isn't a lot of room for it in our current society. But it's critical that we understand this is not about male and female. This is about each of us embracing these complementary, not opposing, but these complementary energies. Mm-hmm. Let's get a bit into the yin and the yang. And the yin, I liked, when you talked about the feminine yin, the darkness, the spiritual, the mystery, receiving, appreciation, flow. That describes much of my life in older age. I'm wondering, there is an evolution to us that's going on as we grow older, and you really don't see. I hate to tell you this, buddy, but you really won't see it till you're over 60, and then
looking forward to it.
My 70s are just a fine decade, just a fine decade. Mm-hmm. But darkness, and I relate darkness to solitude, to emptiness, to getting rid of my ego-centered being, and spiritual mystery, receiving, appreciation, and flow. Flow is a big word. We're going to talk about flow here. Is a big word that is now stronger than this tangible, manifested, active, providing, changing force. That was true for me. In Richard Rohr has a book called Falling Upward, where he talks about first and second half of life, and much of the first half of life is defined in terms, he doesn't use these terms, but seems to be defined in the masculine term, and that we are trying to create an ego. We're trying to create a strong ego. We need a strong ego to have confidence in ourselves and our beliefs in ourselves, and knowing where we're going and what we need to do. But then the second half of life, it's an order, disorder, reorder. We figure out that our running the world is not working. Maybe we need to adopt some other ways of thinking. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, what I'm seeing actually is almost a bell curve of mass. We start the feminine. So Lucas likes to point out that we all start as female, and then males get a different chromosome. That initial part of our lives, from babyhood into childhood, you're in a feminine state. You are being taken care of. Priority is play. These are the goals of just, you get to be the receiver. Nobody expects you to be a contributor, not in any significant way. And it's the coming into adulthood when we start moving into our masculine energies and say, okay, now it's time for me to be a provider, right? So I don't know if we talked about it in our last call, but I think of masculine and feminine energies as almost roles, like nesting dolls, like Russian nesting dolls. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So my husband is to be feminine in relationship to his overarching divine masculine, right? So he gets to be the feminine who receives from God. But then he plays the masculine role for me and the kids, providing the structure, the protection, etc. For me, I get two levels of feminine. I get to be feminine in relationship to God, and I get to be feminine in relationship to my husband, but then I get to be the container, my children. I have to make sure that they're safe. I have to make sure that they're fed, right? I am the protector and the provider in the container for them. So we all start as triple feminine, right? And then as we move into adulthood and we start taking on relationships and we start having children and we start being contributors to our community, then we get to step into that masculine energy. And then what you're describing is on the other side of the bell curve. Lucas calls it grandmother and grandfather energy. It does make sense. You get to become receiver again. You get to be held by those children that you raised. You get to be provided for by the community that you contributed to. And you are there now to be receptacle of wisdom, to be guidance, to show up a completely different way where you are going to need a lot of darkness. You are going to need a lot of solitude. There is going to be a lot of chaos. There should be a lot of spiritual connection, right? So I almost feel like I hadn't seen that before, but I love that idea of as a macro level experience, humans go through a longer dance over the course of their lives.
You know what I do, Caitlin? I want to take a break, and I want to come on, and I'd really like to focus on much of the dance and what that looks like, although we've been talking about it a lot. I've got a couple of more particular questions that I want to ask. So let's take a quick break, and then we'll be right back. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you are listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and we have one of my favorite guests, Caitlin Cogan Doemner. You know, that's a lot of words, Caitlin, saying your whole name. But just, you know, as I said last week, when there is a poetic, but I don't know there's a lilt. I get confused in them. And what I want to, we've been talking about masculine and feminine energies, not having to do with gender. We've been talking about the ancient Chinese philosophy that is thousands of years old of the yin and the yang, and how the yin is the feminine and the yang is the masculine. And I want to know, how much do you, this is probably an impossible, this is not a question you can answer. I think you can just give insight into it. Every male has, to greater or lesser degrees, feminine energies, just as every female operates with masculine energies as well. Are those learned, or are those innate, or is it a combination of both?
Oh, what a fun question. So I believe that the energies that we're talking about are primal. What I mean by primal is from nature itself. So nature has energies, and we see it reflected in literally everything that we see in nature. Every plant has a male and a female component, animals, male and female component, that this polarity, we see it wherever we look in nature. So I do think that their energies themselves will show up in our bodies, whatever name we give them. Whether we call it masculine, feminine, yin or yang, or potato. Like, I don't care what the titles are, the labels are. I think that these are primal forces that will instinctively show up everything that Mother Nature / God make, right? I also think that these are reflected in the Godhead, also, for the record.
The text says so. Mm-hmm. You know, the text says in the beginning, God created mankind, and He created them, mankind as a them, in the image of male and female. So it is
male and female in the image of God,
and that's the image of the divine is male and female. It is not they're not distinct. That is one essential ontological truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree. Now, that being said, beyond the forces, society has its own definitions of what it means to be masculine and feminine, what it means to be male and female. And these are cultural mores that are transmitted and learned, like boys like blue, girls like pink. Girls wear dresses, boys wear pants, right? Like, so those are such surface level, artificial versions of the thing that it's almost not even worth comparing to in terms of like the forces of nature that we're talking about. And that's where you get an individual to decide, do I like dresses? Like, do I love how they flow on my body and that helps me to move into my feminine energy? How could we use costumes to help us pull in energy? I actually did a really fun photo shoot in Bali. The photographer had Michael and I create avatars of who we wanted to be, how we wanted to show up in the world. Then we had to go find and create costumes for that avatar. And so my avatar was really fun and playful and in touch with nature and magical. And so I got this really lovely flowy green dress. I put on a flower crown and my hair was down, and Michael was showing up as strong and powerful and a king. And so we got him these beautiful like linen garments, staff, like a huge, like 8-foot tall tropical flower plant. It was fun. So we got to visually create the internal experience that we wanted to have. And so you can think about all of these different societal expectations and things as more like toys to play with that can help you activate and call in these energies. You mentioned archetypes. I do a lot of work with, I have 12 feminine archetypes. And the reason I love the archetypes is you can pull in the energy that you need. So when you need to be more playful, you can pull in your maiden energy. When you need to be fierce, you can pull in your warrior energy. When you need to be a builder and regal, you pull in your queen energy, right? And so you can kind of, then what I will do with my clients is how can you use your environment, catalyze that experience inside of you? So how can you dress like the queen? How can you listen to warrior music? How can you create and play games in order to activate that maiden self, right? So you can kind of use the things in our world, call in the respective energies that we need when we need them, almost as dance partners.
Just kind of an advert for our next show is going to be on archetypes, and I have one of my friends who is who has identified my 10 archetypes, and it's just they're so bang on and so helpful. And I'm listening to a course by Richard Rohr right now, and he has 4 archetypes, which I kind of struggle with, but it's still, for what he's trying to do, it teaches his lesson. And his archetypes are warrior, lover, sage, and ruler or / leader. And I find those very interesting, especially which I would never call myself a warrior until I look at my whole life growing up was competitive. I was an athlete. I taught young boys how to play baseball, and and proud is he to say that he's got 6 major leaguers playing MLB pro baseball right now that he coached. So there was somewhat of a competitive warrior at hand there. I hate excuse. I'll just say freaking. I hate freaking losing. It is not. So that's the warrior.
That is warrior energy.
That is a warrior. Yes. But when it's combined with the sage, with wisdom, intuition, life learning flow, it becomes what Rohr says. It becomes the explorer, explorer, and what is one of the explorer and adventurer that it becomes. But I gotta do a bunny hole, a rabbit hole.
Sure.
I used to write all of my blogs at the Montage Hotel, which is really kind of nice upgrade hotel with a view of the ocean, and I had my table every Saturday, and I would write. And during Christmas, they had a massive Christmas tree with Christmas presents, opened Christmas presents underneath. They weren't packaged. There were just different things for kids. Caitlin, I got to tell you, it was almost unanimously the boys went after the trucks and the cars, and the girls went after the dolls and the playhouses. Now, what do we do with that? How do we do that with masculine and feminine energies that are non-gender related? I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, it's so fun. So some of it is culturally learned, right? So
okay.
Even as babies, right? You put different toys in the girls' crib than you put in the boys' crib. You use different colors when you're painting the walls of the nursery.
Yes.
So some of this is just subconscious inheritance. But I have a personal pet theory that we get to choose our lives before we come down and live them on Earth. So my pet theory is that we wanted to be in feminine or masculine energy. We wanted to figure out what that looked like. And that's why we chose the gender we chose, right? So for this life, at least, I wanted to experience more of the feminine. And so I chose a female body because that was going to be the easiest container for me to handle as much of the feminine energy as I could, right? Not everybody agrees with this. Some people think that they got the wrong body in the delivery. Who knows? But for me, that's kind of a helpful context. It's like, I wanted to feel what it was like to carry a child inside of my body. That's only available to the females of the species. Okay, well, sign me up for that. And then it might make sense that because I had that cosmic spiritual yearning, that I would want to have a baby doll and hold it. Now, I didn't actually. I'm most exclusively queen energy as my natural default.
Yeah. The ruler, what Roar would call the ruler. Yeah, you are the queen. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. You have very strong masculine energies.
Mother. Yeah.
You know what I wanted to bring up is something that occurred to me, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago. I'm not sure. I had I have my spiritual directors. I have a spiritual director who is abbot of a Roman Catholic monastery abbey, and he is male. But I had one of my life coaches in the last handful of years was a shaman, or is a shaman. And when I was telling her of my dreams and my desires, and I'm probably at this point when we're having these discussions in my late 60s, early 70s, I started telling her of dreams and of different things that are coming into my life. And she said, "Charlie, I really believe you have been visited by the divine feminine, that the feminine is calling you into her presence." And it just, Caitlin, it resonated with me. It's just that I saw these things saw these things of receiving, of mystery, of the beauty of the internal. And I love your word flow, that just kind of getting into it. I'm happiest when I'm in flow, when I'm writing, or could be watching a film, or could be somewhere. I am not distracted by all my thoughts. I'm so into what's going on. And that is a strongly feminine image. And we briefly talked about the divine feminine. What is your take on the divine feminine?
That is a massive question. It's changing too, right? So I mentioned Lucas a couple of times now. Lucas is a Gaia worshiper. He actively speaks to Mother Earth and has a very intimate relationship with Goddess. And so it's very new for me to think about, what does that mean? That somebody that I know and trust and really respect is having a relationship with Goddess, which in my Christian traditional worldview is not allowed, right?
Oh, so the Gaia is feminine energy then.
Right. So Gaia is the representation of divine feminine. Now, is that the same thing as the thing I call God, but uses different pronouns? Don't know. But yeah, I've been lately just invited to how can I speak to the feminine side of God. So for me personally, kind of what I've come to is when I pray, I now pray to Mother, Father, God, instead of just Father God. So that's where I've allowed myself to go at this point, is just to accept and honor, recognize verbally both sides of divine as I see it now.
Yeah, you know what's nice about this? What fits the open thinker like myself? This is not. You cannot define these terms, and they are fluid, and you cannot just pick one or the other and say I'm this. They're both existing. And what we are doing is not discovering our masculine energy or discovering our feminine energy. We are recognizing it as it begins to come to fruition, and then we become open to receive that and accept that, instead of trying to hold tightly to our preconceived notions of what it means to be male, female, masculine, female, or masculine, feminine. That we're open to.
I think it's.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you finish your thought, and then I.
Well, my thought was finished after you said I think it is.
Okay. So, if we think about divine, what even the most conservative theologians would say is that ultimately God is ineffable, right? By definition, infinite. It's outside of the scope of language. And so the very act of language is an act of translation. Like, there literally is no way that we can put into words all that God is. And so the best we can do is come up with metaphors. It's like trying to explain an atom, the solar system, right? It's nothing like a solar system, but we have to talk about it somehow.
Yeah, some kind of metaphor.
We have to put a label on this thing, right? But as soon as we put a label on it, we have to just recognize this is not the thing. It's like the painting of a pipe. This is not a pipe, right? We have to acknowledge that when we say the word God, Goddess, neither one is actually accurate representation of the thing that we're trying to reference. It's just the best metaphor that we can come up with so that you and I can have a meaningful dialogue about it, right?
Yeah, the philosopher Wittgenstein really talked a lot about that, and you are describing, no wonder we get along. You are one of the probably 3 or 4 people that are familiar with my new favorite word, ineffable. It's been my favorite word for about 2 or 3 years now, and that is reality of life that cannot be described by words. Words are insufficient. Mm-hmm. There is so much more going on that although language defines our thinking, defines our processes, but there is so much more to language that when we can step outside of that, we become much greater learners. I want to wrap up our show, and I would like to close with a thought from you and let you expand upon it. Is that okay? This is quoting Caitlin Cogan Doemner. You are the composer of your life. Your job is to call the right music at the right time to serve your mission. Love that. How do you think that fits with all of this masculine, feminine, yin and yang? That you are the composer, and it is your call, it is your job to call in, to write. I use it like when I do my shows. I say I tell guests beforehand on my shows, my job is to write the chords and your job is to sing the solo. I write the chords and the refrain and then let you sing. Mike, if I have not, allowed you the room to sing, and that sounds similar to what you're saying.
Yeah, I love that. As if we're thinking of, I'm creating my own music, my first encouragement would be use harmony. Right? Harmony is two separate notes and played together in such a way that they are better than either note individually. There is a sum that is greater than the parts. So as we're thinking about masculine and feminine energies, goal is not uniformity, unity. It's how are two completely different, distinct things being brought together in a way that makes both of them even more beautiful. And the second thing is recognizing that every song we sing is part of a bigger symphony. My harmony and your harmony get to play together, and we get to create a song and choose how we want to play together as a band ensemble on this planet, and really decide what is the song that we are going to sing as a species.
That's a beautiful metaphor. Harmonies are describing what we talked about, that it is not a gray area. Harmony is not a gray area. Harmony is two distinct voices and two distinct note progressions that are different, yet you put them together and it's perfect. It's perfect. That's a great illustration. Caitlin Cogan Doemner, thank you so much for returning to do a follow-up on this show. Chatting with you is just one of my delights. I so enjoy it.
Right back at you, Charlie. I love our chat.
Okay, thank you. Hang in, we'll talk afterward, and I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.